Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel for this special episode on the topic of nutrition individualization. Today I'm diving into a subject that has garnered significant attention in recent discussions around functional foods and their health claims, as featured in the South China Morning Post. Recently, both the dietitian and I were interviewed separately for an article where the journalists asked us about our personal dietary habits and how they relate to various aspects of health, such as skin, mood, and muscle strength. My responses sparked a lot of conversation, highlighting why health information can often be confusing. It's crucial to understand the mixed messages surrounding nutrition, especially since as clinicians we rely on the best evidence available to guide our patient care and lifestyle advice. To help clarify this complex topic, I invited Dr. Chandni Kumar, a biochemist and a molecular biologist, to join me. We are on a mission to demystify science for you. Together, we'll explore the research on nutritional profiles and the technical aspects of this fascinating science. Our collaboration aims to bridge the gap between scientists and clinicians, fostering better communication to combat health misinformation. I'm truly grateful to Dr. Kumar's time, her expertise, and inputs from other scientists in the field of nutrition science in this special episode. Join us as we unpack these important discussions and empower you with knowledge about nutrition that's tailored to your individual needs. As we go through the comments from the article, we'll discuss the valid points and diverse perspectives that emerged. Special thanks to Dr. Margarita Springer and Jordi Morwani for their comments and inputs. Thank you so much, Shani, for joining in today and for doing this collaboration with me. I'm very, very grateful to be able to have you as a scientist and a biochemist to basically fact check some of the things that I think is actually true, and also for you to collaborate with other people and invite them to have their comments as well, because I think this is one of the best ways that we actually get to debate and critique each other and to help each other actually be better scientists and clinicians. So I'm very excited today because as you may or may not have read, there was a South China Morning Post article about functional foods, and I was actually invited as one of the health professionals to make some comments about what functional foods are and how we define it. There was another dietitian that was actually in the article. So if you haven't read it, make sure you check out the link to this article so you can see the background and the context of it. So the reason why I wanted to do this YouTube channel and this video is because I wanted to see, I wanted to look at the comments of the article and to discuss some of the valid points that were actually brought up in the article. So if you actually read the comments, the question to me personally was, what do experts actually eat? Various health benefits. What the benefits asked about me was about muscle strength training and also getting stronger. So my response to that was I eat fish, pork, and tofu as my sources of protein. So one of the comments that came back was beef is actually superior protein, pork, fish, and so to pork, fish, chicken. And then after that, the response from another commenter was, on what basis? Isn't this a personal, doesn't this depend on individual response? And then the response to that was, no, it depends on the nutritional profile. So I thought that these comments raised some valid points. And that's why I decided, okay, let's talk about what that is. And maybe we can really understand a bit more about this. So I wanted to ask you, Chandni, what were your thoughts when you saw the comment and you read the article?
So first of all, thank you for inviting me. So I love the collaboration between a medical professional and a scientist. So I like to foster this conversation because having two perspectives on one topic is more valuable than just one or the other. What my comment or what I thought initially is, first of all, the article is really good. So I really like both perspectives. And it's not like having two extreme sides, so it's always on a moderate side, and it's up to the person itself how he or she wants to continue with this information. So that's something that I really appreciate. And when I saw the comments, I had to roll my eyes because it's always the same, especially when it comes to food and nutrition. Me personally, also exchanging with professionals who are in this field, everyone has a bit of a different stand. It depends on what kind of studies you look at, and so on and so on. So first of all, when I read the first comment with beef is superior than any other protein, I was thinking, what about the people who are just eating vegetarian or vegan? So are they like not that good anymore, you know? And then the second one I actually is really good because it questions where does this person has the information from. And I think it's also on an individual level, and then as a biochemist and a bit of molecular biology, of course, in my expertise, it comes down to genetics, of epigenetics, etc., etc. So, of course, every person has an individual gene set that is important. How much can you actually absorb? How much is converted? Some people have more enzymes that can do the job, others have less of them, so it's more of an individual thing. But also the last question is, no, it depends on nutritional profile, and I thought it's good to collaborate on this, so people know what actually does mean nutritional profile. Maybe also thinking about what's the difference to the nutritional label that we have, so why does it not always come together, right? So yeah, that were many questions, and I wanted to know, is it really true? Because myself, I'm a vegetarian or vegan, so I don't consume meat or fish or anything, because I always, that's a personal anecdote, I don't want that any animal dies for me. So that's my personal opinion on that. So I try to get like all the stuff that I need, and I'm also doing strength training, so I need to get my proteins in and so on. So it's important that we talk about and educate the people also on that journey.
Yeah, and I actually have to also be very transparent and say that in medical school, we were not taught about nutrition at all. So my perspective about nutrition had changed so much in the last 30 years through being able to go to professional educational courses to learn a bit more about different types of studies, but also at the same time working with patients who, like yourself, may be vegetarian, vegan, or even just don't like the taste of certain foods and find it really difficult to stomach. And that's the practicality of what we have to do as doctors and patients face to face, where we're looking at the individual person, but we also understand that there are lots of research around on the broader population that gives us a signal. And so how do we actually work with that? Because sometimes they can be both true, but conflicting.
Yes.
So I think it's great to be able to have this conversation and talk about that. So, which now brings us to the first question. What is the definition of nutritional profile?
Yeah, good question. I have here on my right side my notes, so I can give it to the audience in the correct way, and I don't forget anything. So per definition is that a nutritional profile is like a comprehensive assessment of the nutrition content that we have and the composition of the food or the diet. And typically these information include like macronutrients, like we know carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, as well as micronutrients like vitamins, minerals, and that is present in the given food or dietary pattern that you have. And of course, what is important, what we know from an academic standpoint. So what does science know about it? Just to give some feedback, in a study published in Journal of Food Composition and Analysis, they were saying that the nutritional profile is defined as the science of categorizing foods according to their nutritional composition. And therefore, they emphasized in the paper that nutritional profiling systems are used to classify foods and based on what is inside. So what kind of nutrients do we have? And that is important because the government needs to have like a portfolio to know what kind of food is good, or let's say over processed is a bit of bad, that people can know what kind of guidelines do we need to have. And it always changes by the latest science that we have, especially when it's on cardiovascular risks or obesity, that the government is alarmed that certain food or certain processed food have too many, I don't know, sugar or fats. And that's why it could have an impact on the people and developing further risks to develop certain diseases. Therefore, yeah.
So it sounds like the reason why we have these profiles is so that we can firstly understand the impact it has on health, but secondly also for governments to monitor the actual quality and the safety of the food. So in case something actually goes wrong, they're able to trace back to what the source is and where the problem arose.
Yes, completely true. Yeah. And another article in the European Journal of Nutrition describes the nutritional profiling more as categorizing the foods for specific purposes based on their nutritional composition. So they are used in various contexts like packaging labeling, right? Also regulation of health claims. So sometimes you find on certain food declaration like helps to maintain, I don't know, your vitamin C level or whatever, something like that, that has a personal impact on you. So you need to be very specific, and that needs to be regulated, because otherwise food companies start to address everything that is in their food be like the magic that you can buy and you stay healthy, which is not true, right? So a good balanced diet and exercise is still the key for a good health. So the basics matter.
Yeah.
And it's also important to reformulate effect or efforts by the food manufacturer. So it means the food manufacturer also have to take into consideration what they're actually delivering. Like you like your favorite pizza, but if you look at it, it contains a lot of fat and maybe sugar. So is it really valuable to eat? I don't know. You know, but if the food company now labels the pizza with "this is the healthiest pizza ever," then of course people will buy it, but it's not true. So that's why we need these regulations, and that comes by profiling the food. And the WHO, so World Health Organization, they say or they published guidelines on nutritional profiling because they say the science of classifying or ranking foods according to their nutrition composition for reasons related to preventive disease and promote health. So they are really clear on the stand that we need to know what is inside of the food so we can say, is it healthy for us or does it promote diseases? And therefore this definition emphasizes the public health application of nutritional profiling. So now you learned it is important to know what is inside so we can actually know, is it good for us or should we have it more as a treat?
So I guess there are information that the consumer themselves can actually get from the labeling. And I also have to say that sometimes that labeling, there's a lot of marketing in that labeling. We'll get to that later. So we'll actually define what that is in the next question. But also it helps the consumer themselves decide, is this important for me to have? Because sometimes what happens is during the processing of food, certain nutrients may actually be removed. And so I will see sometimes things like this is fortified with extra vitamin C or D or iron, for example. And so this may help the consumer make better choices, particularly if they know that they may need to supplement that particular micronutrient or vitamin or mineral in their diet. So I think that's very helpful. And I also want to actually say that as part of this search for information, you also reached out to a colleague of yours, Margarita, or a friend of yours, Margarita, who helped with this information as well. So we're not just flying blind and,
No.
we know all of this.
So to be fair here, I sent my script to Jordi Mowani and Margarita Springer. Jordi is still a PhD, but he's doing it in nutritional science, and Margarita is already having a PhD in nutritional science. And both of them said the information that we are giving is okay from a nutrition scientist perspective. Therefore, I would like to shout out both of them for fact checking again, because of course me as a biochemist, I cannot go out of my expertise, so I'd like rather take people into that and ask them if it's fine. So
Yep, I also do the same. A lot of the times I'll ask my dietitian, is this correct? I'm about to write this information out there. And I'll always ask my colleagues also for the facts as well, because I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And, we all make honest mistakes, but it's often nice to have somebody look over the content that we're going to share.
So rather having a mistake before, I fact check it like 5, 6, 7 times, even 10 times before I make any information out, which sometimes is a bit harmful for the video because it takes too long to release. But I hope that people appreciate now our efforts here to make this overall video.
Yes, definitely a lot of effort goes into all these videos content that you don't see. So make sure that you subscribe and you listen to the content because you know that the information it's valuable.
Yeah.
So that then brings us to the second question. How does the nutritional profile that you describe actually differ from nutritional labeling?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when you think of how a nutritional profile is now made, scientists give, I don't know, chia seeds have so and so many proteins, carbohydrates, whatever. Why don't you exactly find this on a nutritional label? So it's like conflicting sometimes. And key is, of course, the purpose. So usually having the nutritional profile of a food on the package is a bit difficult to read. So it has like sometimes such a list. Do you really want to read that list? I don't think so. Sometimes it's irritating because you don't know the name of the ingredient, like vitamin C, we all, but it can be also written in ascorbic acid, like it has a different name. So first of all, the purpose is kind of important to know. So a nutrition profile is a comprehensive assessment of food's nutrients content using categorizing or ranking the foods, and often for regulatory or public health purposes. In contrast, the nutritional label is a standardized display of nutrient information on food packaging intended for consumer use. So it's more like the small version of a nutritional profile, so that you as a consumer understand what's going on. Then, of course, the scope. The scope is nutritional profiles typically consider a really broad range, as I told you, and include scoring system, evaluate overall nutritional quality, whereas the labels actually use the display as a fixed set of nutrients required by food labeling regulations. So sometimes there are guidelines what has to be on the food label to be displayed, and everything else is more if the food manufacturer wants to give the information. So this is kind of also regulated. Then, of course, we have the application. Nutritional profiles are used by us researchers, policymakers, and food manufacturers for many purposes, like developing front of pack labeling system, regulating health claims, and also a guide product reformulation, whereas nutritional labels are primarily designed for direct consumer, so they get actually directly the point of what is inside in the food. Then it's very complex. As I told you, the list could be like this, and you want to have maybe like this, so it makes sense. Maybe you can show like the differences of chia seeds, for instance, nutritional label versus nutritional profile. Of course, the accessibility. Nutritional profiles usually you really don't find so easily on the internet, because usually this is somewhere hidden in papers where people were talking about certain food ingredients and so on. So it's more like for an expert audience rather than for the consumer. And that already gives you why is there a difference between the label and the profile, because the label is more made for the consumer to understand if the food that I'm taking now has valuable nutrients, or is this something that I should have as a treat because it has more fat, more sugar, more salt. So that is the difference between both.
And I also find that even though it sounds like that the nutrition profile is more for experts and when they're doing research and studies, because they need to really understand in depth how the actual nutrients, vitamins, macronutrients are impacting the body. Whereas for labeling, it's really for the consumer to decide, okay, does this food have higher fat or lower fat? Does it have more fiber? Does it have sugar? So it's more simplified so that it actually targets the health needs for the consumer. But I also have to add that, I still find that a lot of people that I speak to don't necessarily know how to read the label.
So Jordi made a perfect video or a perfect short about this, that sometimes people don't understand how to read it. And I'm not sure if it's called an ample system. So we in Germany, for instance, we have like the system where A to, I think, D or E it's graded. And then A is like green, B is already like yellowish, orange, and then it goes like to red. And the problem is sometimes that these food labelings cannot really or they do not match the nutritional profile, because just as an example, you would get an A on something that is very protein rich, but in the end contains a lot of sugar and salt. So it's kind of like having how do you call it, so you trick the system. So that's why sometimes nutritional labels are not as easy to understand. So I completely get that, and we always in Germany have this discussion how to change the nutritional label so consumer actually understand which are good, which are bad, and hopefully not trick the system. So this is also something that we need to take into consideration. So always be very critical when you read a label saying this is an A+, and you're like, really? Okay, let's check,
Yeah, so it's very challenging, I think, for the consumer, because different countries will have different systems and there are different ways around it, as you have highlighted. Here in Hong Kong, we actually don't have anything to tell you how that food actually impacts you. We just have the very simple label of calories and fats and proteins and sugars per serving. And even with that, there's already confusion, because sometimes a serving is actually not the whole packet. It's actually maybe one half biscuit in the packet, but it's actually given you the calories of just that serving. So you eat the whole packet thinking that's the calories. So there are so many problems with it. But I really respect the people who are doing these labels, because it is a tough thing to do. So it's just to say that there's no perfect way of doing it. It's doing the best that we can, but understanding the complexity of it, and so which then brings us to the next challenge, and what are the actual main challenges in creating accurate nutritional profiles?
So from a scientific perspective is when you want to analyze what is inside. Usually what we do is we like to have biological replicates, you say. So if you're working with cell lines, that you at least 3 times have the cells cultured and hopefully the same condition. But as we know, nature is not stable. Nature is changing. So one thing, of course, is the natural variation that we have in the foods, right? Not every apple has the same content, because it grew a bit differently. It got more sun, less sun, all these kind of things affect it. So in general, it's like the factors that are inside due to climate and agriculture practices change. Therefore, we try to have like an average. So we say like this apple on average has this nutritional profile, but it could be that the one apple that you are eating has, for instance, I don't know, more fructose, the other one less fructose because it got more exposed to the sun or whatever, but this is appreciating the natural variability. That is normal. That is not something that is not okay. So that is normal.
That's normal.
We need to say that. Yes, we need to say that. And therefore, having like a single value for every food that we have is a bit of, a stretch, because otherwise you would kick out the natural environment. Then, of course, when you have a bit more processed food, so let's take the apple as an example, you smosh it, then you have like this, some people buy it because they want to do some pancakes and eat smoshed apples, for instance. So there's a type of processing already that, of course, has an impact on the nutritional as well, because eating a whole apple is something different than eating the smoshed one, right?
Yeah.
So some of the vitamins, minerals, fiber content could be different, right? So because it got a bit processed, but still it's not like the worst, like it is still have its value. So sometimes it can affect it, or if you pasteurize, right? So sometimes when you do it in the milk, the content might get a bit lower.
Yeah,
it is the nature of it. So if you denature something, it is the nature of it. Or if you cook something, right? It's also something, you boil something, or you add it to fry something, these all have kind of an influence on what you have from the original product. Then, of course, the methods that we apply to measure. So every analytical method has its limitation. So sometimes we try to, it's called limit of detection and limit of quantification, which means what is the lowest amount that I need to be detected in a good quality. And that sometimes vary between instruments, between methods. Then, of course, how much can I quantify? So how much is in there? And that is also sometimes difficult, because if you're already at this detection limit, how will you quantify if you're like at this baseline where you're not sure if you really detected it?
There's a limit to how...
There's a limit.
Yes.
Genau. Of course, and very importantly, sometimes it varies between labs. So one lab maybe is able to see it, but the other lab not. So it also sometimes is a bit difficult. That's why we do these routine analysis over many, many labs to see which lab is performing good, which is not maybe. And these ones get like recognition back, and they are told like you should have, it's called ring trials, that they should have a look how to improve, because let's say they want to have the nutritional profile of an apple. And I don't know, the vitamin C content of apples is measured from 5 labs, and 2 labs are not able to do it. Then, of course, it questions a bit why didn't they find it and the 3 others did. So they get like a call back and be like, hey, you need to improve your methods maybe. So we do it a second time, and we help you to establish that. And that's how you assess if a certain analytical method will be applied in general then. Then, of course, the sampling issue is a problem. So what kind of samples do you take? And we could have a different nutritional profile for an apple that is out of Italy and the one that is out of America, It has to do with the environment, of course, and also with the soil. So the soil also plays an important role. So therefore, we need to take into account where does it come from. So of course, this will also be challenging. So we need to make actually a nutritional profile of a apple from different regions. And in your case, it will also have a different one if it's from, let's say, China, or Hong Kong or whatever region. Maybe also data quality plays a role. So some of the foods that we have, especially in the developing countries, they cannot really be measured. So when we look at Africa, for instance, because they don't have the access to all the analytical methods, so we actually lose the information from there. Of course, there's also bioavailability. Every one of us has a different bioavailability because, as I said in the beginning, of our genetic profile. So some of us maybe produce an enzyme more that can break it down a bit better, others don't. So that would also play into account. How we absorb them. Sometimes the food matrix, yes,
the condition of the person. So for a classic example is someone with celiac disease, where if they have small bowel inflammation, they're not going to be able to absorb the B vitamins and iron and vitamin D. So they're going to have a different response to the same food that somebody else who doesn't have celiac has. So that's also something sort of, that we know of, but there are also other individual things that we're just starting to be aware of. So that's very challenging. It's not just the food.
But maybe also how we differently absorb the same nutrition in different foods. So I just had this in a conversation. I was teaching that to the medical students. So when you look at meat and plant-based iron, so the bioavailability in meat is a bit higher than in plants. Why? Because plants have the iron in the form of +3, and in meat it's +2. So the intestine can quickly absorb it in the way so for the meat, but not the or not so quickly the other one. And now to omit this problem, it's recommended to use like an oxidation reagent, which would be vitamin C, for instance, that you, for instance, put a bit on your lentils, therefore you can absorb it. These are little tweaks and tricks that you can learn over the time to get the same bioavailability or the absorbance by just knowing how it works. So depending where you are, you don't have the problems with, certain nutrients like vitamins or whatever, because it's good available. Others would need, so one of them would be vitamin D, for instance. So places where sun is not so often seen, it's recommended to supplement it, of course. But someone who is like on a daily basis exposed to the sun don't need to supplement it, because he can or she can do it by them own, making vitamin D through the sun, right? So that would be also something. We need to develop systems that appropriately weigh the importance of different nutrients. So how do we balance high protein content against highly saturated fat in some content? Therefore, this is very complex. And there's not, one fits for all solution.
Yeah. Because when you talk about just one food can have so many different variations, like you said. Particularly, if we go back and talk about beef, for instance, there are different cuts of beef with different sort of fat content versus lean. So, there's no, it's a cow. It's a cow, but there are different parts of the cow that have different nutrient benefits, right? When you talk about beef, you also want to talk about, is it lean beef? Is it Wagyu beef, which I absolutely love and enjoy? One of my favorite things. So I think it's valid to talk about nutritional profile, because we do studies, we understand, and we also want to test, is it better than something else, because it helps us be more accurate in how we may make certain recommendations. Then that brings us to the next question, which is, how are these profiles measured, and which scientific analytical methods are applied? Because it sounds like that this is not, a simple, straightforward approach, that there are many different ways of doing this, and there are definitely many different things that you have to analyze, and that's very involved.
Yeah. So of course, I'm just can talk about a certain type of methods, because I'm not a food chemist or so. I cannot talk too much about it, but I understand the techniques behind it, because in the end they all have the same basis. So first of all, we need to know the moisture content. So it means how much water is actually inside. And therefore, this is by drying the sample and then, just weighing it. Then we sometimes burn to analyze what kind of calories are inside. It was interesting to me, and I remember back when I was at university, we had this experiment where I think we burned like sugar or something, really like in this small kind of analytical instrument, and then we could figure out what's actually the calorie of the sugar content. That was interesting. So that would be one way how to assess the calories. Protein content, there are different methods how to assess it in the lab. There are calorimetric ones where you can assess it. In this case, it would be a Dumas method, or I hope I pronounce it correctly, Kujedal method. So I could explain a bit more in detail maybe in another video. The fat content, you just extract the solvents and quantify it. So you can extract fat by applying organic content and then measure it. And carbohydrates, you usually calculate the difference of the food. Of course, instrumental analysis, there are many instruments that you can use depending on what kind of content you want to look at. So one would be atomic absorption spectrophotometry. So that is used to make the mineral content analysis. Then HPLC is the one that I also use. So high performance liquid chromatography, if you want to know the content of the amino acids, therefore knowing the protein content in the end. Gas chromatography, mass spectrometry is to identify and quantify bioactive compounds and potentially contaminants or fatty acid analysis. So what's the difference between both is that one, you measure something in the gas phase, the other one is more on a liquid base. So you need to know what kind of compound you're looking at, and then you decide which method is better for each or other. And they are always constantly improving. So it's not like we have a method and we always do the same. So depending on the instruments that are coming new, people try to optimize methods or maybe try new methods, because sometimes certain compounds cannot be detected. And if you improve the method, maybe you are able to do it. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, vitamins, using HPLC or spectrophotometric techniques is the same. You know that vitamins exist as water soluble and fat soluble, so that there you have to decide, do I go with HPLC or do I maybe do it with GCMS? That would be also something. Yeah, these are kind of like the main food chemistry analytical methods that people use. You need to know what you're looking for.
Now I appreciate more people who actually study food science and why they dedicate so many years to just understanding how to measure food.
Maybe an anecdote here. So I'm taking care of a mass spec, but I'm in the protein analytics. And she, who is a representative in that company, actually is a food chemist. And we always have this really nice conversation about what she did in her PhD. And I was talking about, glycosylation, so sugar attached to a protein. And she was like, as a food chemist, I hate sugar. And I was like, why? Yeah, because it messes up your whole instrument. You need to clean all the time the instrument. And I'm like, okay, good to know. And that is kind of interesting to know. So what kind of problems they have to deal with, which maybe we don't have to, and the vice versa. So it's not always easy to make these nutritional profiles, because sometimes, you don't have the right method to do so, then you're kind of limited.
Yeah, I just can't imagine before we had all these advanced technologies and measurement tools, how people actually, like how the generation of scientists actually quantified food.
Yeah, yeah.
And how much of that has actually been updated and how much of the previous information are we applying today. So I think that's one thing to appreciate, is that nothing in science is actually set in stone. It does evolve over time. So that's the reason I think it's important to understand that what we might say today may actually not be relevant in 10 years time, 20 years time, as more and more data becomes available. So we just try to make the best decisions and evaluations that we can with the information that we have. One of the trends that's happening, and this is the reason why the article in South China Morning Post was published, was because a lot of companies actually made health claims on the food that they're producing, saying that they're functional, but there's actually a universal definition of what is functional, which I guess in some countries it implies that the food has a specific benefit to health and has been studied and has been approved. If you really want to know what the narrow definition of functional food is, you can read the article and understand it a bit more. But moving on towards the actual final question is how do we, in terms of the nutritional profile of meat, or in terms of the protein content that's in meat, how does that actually impact on building muscle? We do need to have a good muscle protein synthesis in order for us to not just build muscle size, but actually more importantly from my perspective is muscle strength and muscle power, because
also maintaining the muscle, right? So
maintaining that, because at the age we start to lose that, and particularly women in perimenopause, we lose pretty much almost 20% across that transition. And so not only do we lose mass, but we lose strength and power much more quickly. And so then, the new guidelines these days are telling women that we actually need to consume more protein in order to offset that condition, sarcopenia or dienopenia. So how do we actually now use that knowledge of what the nutrition of the profile of the food is to what we want to set as a goal?
So when we tie it back to the initial comment, it says that beef protein, so animal protein, is the superior one. And kinda. Okay, so the first thing is that, of course, the protein intake is a bit easier with meat or with animal-based food rather than with the stuff that comes from a plant. That is kind of, that is known. But the thing is, what does the overall nutritional profile say? And it's considered as high quality because when you look at proteins, they are made of amino acids. And in general, the amino acid profile of a meat contains all the essential amino acids that we need to have a functional body, to make all the proteins that we need, not only in the muscle, also in the cell. We need to consume all of these amino acids.
Because they're essential. So we can't make them. We actually have to cook food.
Yeah. And of course, this is kind of important, but but you could also have this when you have the right plants. So you could come to the same amino acid profile if you know how to combine certain plants that has these essential amino acids. So you would compensate actually for for eating meat. Then, of course, bioavailability, right? So animal-based proteins in meat or whatever do have a higher bioavailability than plant-based, but you can absorb it, and therefore it's a bit easier for the body to consume, but doesn't make, or in my opinion, doesn't make the plant-based bad. It's just you need to know how to consume it so that you get the same profile back. when
there's an extra step, right? So
yeah,
if you look at animal products, they have a complete essential amino acid profile in, say, one serving, or whatever serving that is in one food. Whereas in plants, different plants will have different forms or combinations of the essential amino acids. So you need to know how to combine the different plant-based protein foods in order to get the complete profile.
yes.
And then the second part is that animal proteins are easier to absorb by the body, whereas there are probably a more of combination of things that you have to do for plant-based proteins. So from that perspective, I guess it's understandable why someone would say, yeah, it's superior.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that, is it really superior if you're someone who chooses not to eat that food?
Yeah, it's also about a personal preference, right?
Yeah.
And as I said, for me, I take into account that it may be not so bioavailable, that I have to take a bit more into consideration that I get all my essential amino acids, but I don't have the problem that some animal died for me, like that is my personal touch on it.
This is a really important point because we don't do this in a lab. We don't live in isolation. We're not in a bubble. We have our own upbringing. We also live in different countries, you in Germany, me in Hong Kong. So culturally, there might be certain foods that we just grew up with, that we are familiar with, that we're comfortable with. And then in some parts of the country, because of certain cultural preferences, certain foods are actually not readily available. And in order to be able to purchase those types of food, it's astronomically expensive, or it's just not economical for the individual person. So I really think that it's good to know all the science and what the impact of it is, and have a basic understanding of how to optimize whatever preferences it is that you have. Because I think one of the difficulties that we all personally, whether you're a scientist or a non-scientist, physician or not, we all eat food. So we all have an opinion about food. And it's very, I've fallen into this trap, is sometimes my own personal biases may actually make sort of encourage me to give an advice that might not be beneficial for the other individual. Or, a really classic thing is, when I didn't know much about nutrition in the past, I would think, well, there's one diet for everybody. You just follow the food pyramid. How difficult is that? That's the guideline.
It's getting more and more. So, of course, I want to stress again, I'm not someone from the nutritional space, but I do read papers out of that. And for me, because I'm interested myself, I read papers about certain foods, certain diets that they try in clinical, so randomized control trials, that they figure out like what is happening to the people when they have a certain food. Also taking into account that these nutritional studies are really hard to make, especially when you have human. Do they stick to the diet? Do they just say it? All these kind of things. And it becomes more and more evident that the type of food that you're eating has an influence, of course, on the gut and the bacteria and viruses and fungi that they live there on a normal basis. So it's not something that has to do with disease. It's just a normal baseline that we all have. They have very important function in our whole body system. And depending on what you eat, you alter these little organisms, and therefore they affect the whole body, because they also produce like little metabolites that are circulating through us, right? And there's one study just recently came out, how you could get your gut microbiome, it's called, that you get it back on track by changing your diet, so that you have like levels of before. And that was really interesting to me to know that this really interesting connection, how what we eat actually in the end makes you, like the body, what it makes out of you. Do you feel well? Do you feel bad about it? Because I think every one of us enjoys fast food, but everyone who knows that whole foods or in general a good diet is a bit more giving you more. And sometimes, when I have fast food, I feel bad afterwards. Not only because I know that I didn't treat my body well, but it also gives you like this constant hunger feeling because you're not satiated. And that also has an impact, right? So this is kind of also very important to notice.
Yeah, I think what we're kind of now getting at is we can measure food content. It's kind of like measuring what's in your body. But then when that food is consumed by us as an individual, we can do different types of studies on the health outcomes. So one is observing a group of people eating a certain food and looking at what is the trend. So we don't do any interventions on them. That's what we call observational studies. So we just observe people for a period of time. And they're great because we can observe them for a very, very long time or have records of what they've been eating for a long time and then kind of go, oh, what's the association with cancer or breast cancer specifically, or colon cancer or dementia or depression, for example. And we can see some association. And these are cheap studies, well, relatively cheap. I wouldn't say completely cheap, but they're harder to do than the more stricter nutrition studies. But it's not without its setbacks or limitations, because we have to understand how are these people remembering the food that they've eaten. I can barely remember what I ate yesterday. So depending on how they actually got the food recalled, did they measure it for them? Was it given to them? Did they have to fill in a diary, which very
so I think in that study they gave the food, so they had like a plate that they had to eat. So it's not like up to you as a patient or as a sample. You as a human get this plate and you have to eat it. And I found this very interesting. They also had like a picture showing how the meal looks like, and I was like, oh, cool.
So they also locked them up so that they couldn't order food delivery.
Yes, yeah. So otherwise it would mess up the whole, study. But it was really interesting to read. So you can share it with your audience.
Please
I will
do.
send you
I think the gut microbiome is extremely interesting. I've been sort of reading some of this research and clinical outcomes and how this affects our satiety, appetite, and also our metabolism. And I think it's a really fascinating aspect of health that we're only really just starting to understand, and that's the emerging evidence.
But here also it ties back. The analytical methods were not there back then. That's why we didn't know so much. Now we have the analytical methods and people can now look at it. So you see it's evolving over time, and we understand now what kind of important connection it has. And correlation studies also help us to understand, it has something to do with the gut. It has something to do with the brain in the end. So people are now getting into this gut-brain axis, gut-muscle axis, all these kind of things to understand a bit more that food is not just consuming it and keeping you alive. It's actually essential to have a really good functioning body. It's an overall also like a mood thing as well. So if you eat bad food, you will have bad mood, right? So it also has something to do with your overall mood swings and how do you sleep. It's also kind of tied back to what you eat. So it is essential to understand what's going on there, to also get an idea of what happens when something goes wrong and how can we get it back to the normal levels so the person is maybe not sick anymore or develops a certain disease. So this is all kind of ongoing right now, and it's, let's say, a really hot topic, but I'd like to read about it, but I also take myself a bit back to make any exaggeration like, wow, this is cool, and I would like to see where this field is developing, because it's also really important to give the researchers time to get the best evidence out there.
And research is slow, as I understand.
Especially if you don't have money.
Yeah. And that's the
like
other.
we have the problem now with the NIH in America.
Yeah. So this is a challenging area, and I wish we had all the research, but I don't think it's so bad. I think we are having correlation studies. We can get some type of direction as to what to further research on. And so all these types of studies are important. None of them are bad or good. I think there are different levels and we can take different things from it. But it's important not to over-interpret them.
That's exactly. Take it more on a neutral standpoint. That is, I think, the most important takeaway here, that you should take always, of course, any study presented with a grain of salt, because you never, but I think personally, just hearing about it or getting informed is good, so the people know where the research is heading, so people will maybe in 5 to 10 years know a bit more about it. But and that's the problem on social media, taking these studies and telling people how to actually now eat is something that I really would not recommend. So whenever someone comes, doesn't have the credentials, and is taking one study and exaggerating about it, I would really highly recommend to be critical about it, because we could also promote now here certain diets because we think it's good, but it's not one size fits all, right? So we have to be really critical when it comes to all these claims, and all these people out there who are doing these misinformation stuff. We are trying our best to stand against that, to give the best information here.
We're now taking up space in the social media space to try to hopefully be part of the movement to help clarify these things. So I'm going back, I'm always cautious about when people ask me what I eat personally, because sometimes when you're out there talking to the public, it can be taken as this is what I think everybody should eat. Now, I just want to set the record straight, is whatever I say I eat is not what I recommend for my patients or other people. It's two very different things. And from my understanding of reading all the outcomes research is every diet actually works if you stick to it. So for me, when I'm working with an individual, my question isn't what is superior in the scientific space, but what is actually going to be sustainable and achievable and affordable for that person for their long-term health. So that's the main question I'm asking, because if someone can't actually stick with what they decide to eat and it's difficult, it's not going to happen. So that's very important for me to understand and respect, because we all have individual choices and we're all emotional human beings. We eat, especially in the Chinese culture, we connect over food. In Asian culture is very common. So it's important to factor those things in. So it's not a straightforward answer as to, okay, this is superior, so you should just stick with this. If that was the case, my job as prescribing lifestyle intervention would not be necessary. We wouldn't have the epidemic of chronic diseases that we have today if we all knew what to do and we did it. The challenge really is actually in individualizing some of these things. And so I also have to say that, yes, the quality of protein can be important, especially for building strength. But if we look at some of the latest research, and I kind of went back to review this because I'm always curious, as to what are we finding when we're looking at the body of evidence, especially when it comes to strength. Does it matter how much protein you eat? Does it matter how much training you do? And it turns out actually that when I came across this comment, I actually went back and said, okay, so what do we know in terms of the guidelines about strength training? Because what I did find was there was a study that looked at the quantity of protein intake with resistance training, and the comparison was actually in healthy people. And they found actually if they looked at the effectiveness of resistance exercise for stimulating muscle strength, that seems to have a higher impact than the actual protein itself. So as long as you actually met the minimum requirements for protein synthesis, the resistance training actually played a much bigger role, and the protein kind of took a backseat. So what I then say is it didn't even actually discuss what type of protein. It just said, it just gave a number of 1.6 grams per kilogram of your body weight. Appears to be a good supplementation for people who were younger. And younger, they meant 45, less than 45.
Okay. Yeah.
So I actually don't even fit in that category anymore. So
me.
For me. Exactly. So again, the requirements differ according to your age, according to your health status. But regardless, the effect size of the impact of the dietary component for strength training was less so than the actual effect of the resistance training. So I think, that if I were to choose one thing to change, is just go and lift heavy stuff.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I just recently saw a really good video also by Dr. Lane Norton, because usually when you are have a chronic disease like kidney failure is coming, you're on dialysis, people usually say, oh, better don't eat protein too much, right? But he made a really good video explaining that a recent study figured out that actually taking protein is beneficial for the kidney. So this old stigma that is around is not valid in that sense anymore. And that really makes a big difference for all the people who are chronically ill, to evaluate this science is evolving, and something that was maybe 10 years back stated as really bad might be not true anymore, because we now figured out with long-term trials that it doesn't have a bad benefit. It's actually beneficial for you to do it, so you protect your kidney a bit more. And lifting weights actually is not contradictory. It's actually the opposite. So it makes completely sense to when we come back to the comment, it's very one-sided thinking, right? And it excludes the individual differences. It excludes everything that is science-based. Only to make the statement, only that one protein source is the only one. I don't know. It's not good. You should always critically think about it.
And I also think that we don't just, like we said, we don't exist in just a vacuum. Our bodies have evolved to be able to eat all kinds of different types of diets. So for me, variety is the spice of life. So if I can find a variety of different types of foods that I can enjoy, that I can sustain, that's also, I think, something which over time we also need to reevaluate, because even though something might work for you now, it may not work in the future. And this is something I found for me as well, because some things in my own medical history didn't really allow me to continue eating lots of red meat. And I love steak. I enjoy a nice Wagyu burger with a croissant buns that are really, it's a processed food, but I allow myself to eat that because, generally I would say I have a fairly healthy diet. So I enjoy these foods and I don't have any problems with it. I don't have any issues with it. But, sometimes we think about foods and we call it bad or not good, or I just call them less healthful. But what I used to be able to eat in my 20s had to change when I got to my 40s. And as I'm, looking forwards to my 50s, I know that that's also to evolve and change, because our bodies adapt, and through that adaptation and through also health changes and with aging, we also have to be aware that we also need to understand how to optimize that particular decade of life and beyond. So it's not a static, even our own bodies, it's not a static position. There are going to be changes that occur. So that's one lesson that I learned, which I want to share with people, because sometimes we think, we just stick to that diet that used to work. Why doesn't it work now? And we're quite attached to those things. I think it's important to reevaluate with how your body's changing and adapting to things, that we also need to reflect on what.
Maybe on that note, it's of course important to know in what kind of decade you are right now with your age and your body composition. But maybe take into account that not one single pathway in the cell or in the muscle is the only key to target. So usually when we teach the different metabolism pathways that we have, and medical students get really, really crazy about how they're intertwined. So it's not one pathway that goes through, it's actually connected to each other. So one metabolite that is produced by an enzyme might be also in another pathway. So separating that completely and saying, oh, you only need to take that kind of supplement or this kind of food. I always like to tell people the human body is more complex than you think. It's everything connected with each other on the very most smallest basal level that is in the cell. And breaking it down only to like glycolysis or whatever is really like making a claim that is not really true. So I hope you appreciate that the body is very, very complex, and not one pathway is the one leading thing. Many pathways are actually simultaneously running, so it depends completely on the body right now, how you are, what you do. Are you sitting? Are you standing? Are you exercising? Everything. Yep. So I think that is also important information to take into account, that not one pathway is the thing to target. It's more like overall understanding how the body works to get the best for you.
Yeah, sometimes I think when it's important to do the research to understand the mechanisms and the pathways, because we want to better be specific about it, but we can get really lost, with the trees and miss the forest altogether. And our bodies are much more complicated. So it knows prioritize things, and we have to respect that pathway, that physiology as well. So that's why making decisions and choosing the right type of eating pattern or even exercise is very, very difficult. But always say that there are lots of options. That means that there are lots of options. There's not one way, there are multiple ways. So it's about finding one that actually suits you personally, that ties in with your preferences. So, I think this is a great conversation. I think we got a lot of takeaways from this and understand more how complex it is to actually measure food, and then understand how it's actually working when we eat it. And so, I think understanding the context of this also matters. Are we talking about public health, population level, or are we talking about the individual? And what's the goal of that individual? Before we actually wrap up, I actually want to sort of, ask you to say or share, what did you take away from our collaboration? What did you enjoy? And why do you think it's important for a doctor and a researcher to collaborate and to talk about this together?
So I love the collaboration between us, because I learn from the medical field and you learn something from the scientific field. And my key takeaways now from this is like the difference between nutritional profile and the nutritional label, how important it is to distinguish between what a researcher needs for his research or her research to understand what the nutritional profile is, whereas the consumer just needs the nutritional label to understand what is actually inside. So you don't need the nutritional profile per se to understand actually what is inside the food. There's no real one diet fits all, right? The body is very complex. This is also something that I took away. And I hope that people will appreciate our stance on it. And why I think we should collaborate is just the overall biology is very complex. And a medical professional has a different view than a scientist. As you see, I'm more on the cellular level, organ, tissue, etc. level, maybe the whole body. But you have on a daily basis someone sitting in front of you, having problems, and talking about from both angles. I guess that will be the future of the information, to provide a more holistic view on both sides. And one key element also in my work is that we combine both perspectives so people have a more holistic view on everything. So they understand why medical professionals might not be into too many scientific content or topics, because it requires a lot of scientific work that maybe someone from the medical field cannot really understand, and vice versa. So I would never go out and talk about medical things, right? So at least I would not do it. I don't know if someone else is doing it, but I know my limitations. And I think to overcome the limitations, we need more collaborations.
Mm-hmm. And for me, it's actually, finding someone like yourself who actually, have to be so meticulous in the way that you work in the lab, because everything has to be like perfect, just right, controlled. And then to teach medical students, where now you actually have to bring all those pathways and make it relevant to when they actually go out and treat patients and see real people. And that's a different skill set altogether. And it calls on having experience. That's why we have to go to the hospital, be attached to it, do our clinical internship, so that we understand how to apply all that information to the person. So, I would never be, I'm not trained to do research, but at least now I respect the people in the field and how much effort it takes, because it's not even just doing the actual research. It's also funding, applying for the funding, writing proposals so that you get the funding, because the topic has to be exciting enough. And there's so many challenges in that field, and funding is just one of them. The other one is recruiting people and studying all populations. So I think hats off to the researchers who are doing this great work, so that we use that information in a way.
And also clinician scientists, so medical professionals who are actually working in hospitals but get the time to do research. I do respect them so much, because they have to balance actually two lives, and that is incredible to me how they do it. And I feel so fortunate to know some of these people and actually help them in their research. That is for me the most thing that I can give back to the public, to the society, that my work somehow has an impact later on for the better health of a person. So and for me it's more like, I don't know when this happened, but science and medicine got somehow very separated disciplines, even though the scientific basis is the medical basis, it has to be together. So we need to combine it again back. And that are the efforts that we are putting now in.
Yeah, and I want to also now sort of say to our audience, or my audience, please go and listen to your interview, because you do interview doctors who are researchers, so the clinician scientists who are actually dedicating their entire career to different types of outcomes. And these are the doctors who see real patients. They see the need to prove an idea or intervention. And one of my favorite episodes was when you interviewed Professor Hall, because when I listened to him, I could not believe that 30 years ago he started this journey to exercise interventions in disease populations. So it's wonderful that you have him on, and that you have these connections. And so I want to hear more about what they're doing, because that inspires me to continue doing what I do as well. So definitely check out.
Thank you so much for the shout out. I just can't give it back to you. So Laurena should also be more watched, because you're doing so great information about menopause, what you can do, what you have to take into consideration, what kind of changes are happening inside the body, especially in women. Of course, I'm a bit far away from that now, but still it's good to know what could happen to me. So it's good to know, and having also evidence-based information is for me key, and you're doing such a great job in giving people this evidence-based information. Therefore, really go and watch all her videos, and I'm happy that we are collaborating and became friends over the time. So yeah, thank you very much, and there's more to come, I guess.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you again very soon.